man. I don't see a whole lot of information about you on the internet.
Mm.
So I there's a ton of stuff out there about your show. There's a ton of stuff out there about, like your guests and stuff, but I don't know much about you personally. And I was just interested. I was like, because over time on your show, you've mentioned that you don't have a car and stuff like that. So I like, why don't you have a car? And
Because I'm
so
broke, my guy.
hey, I hear that. I hear that. I got a 20-year-old piece of shit sitting in the driveway.
Yeah.
But um yeah, so I don't have much information out there about you, and I was just curious. And man, I really really love your show. So I wanted to talk to you and have like a casual conversation and get to know you a little bit and talk about some of your content because your show is great. You do a great job.
Thank you so much, man. And do you like Richard or Ricky?
Ricky.
Ricky. All right, we'll go
Yeah.
with Ricky. Well, I do want to say I really appreciate all the over the top support you've given for a long time. Like I've seen you in there for well over a year. It's probably been about 2 years. And when I meet guys like you, it's just like it really hits home because it's like this is why it happens.
Right.
It's got to be people like you out there who are like, hey, you know what? I kind of fuck with this. This is good. Let's check this out. So thank you very much for doing
Man,
that,
I
and
love your
it's my pleasure to
honesty.
take time.
I love your honesty, and that shines through on your show as well. And like you're genuine, you're just a genuine guy. You really are genuinely interested in the things that you have on your show, and it really shows in your work. And you're man, I can't. There's so many content creators out there that do their thing, but they fall into that audience capture. You know what I'm talking about? Like they
Mm,
they cater to their audience, and you seem to cater to the shows that you want to do
that's
versus
right.
what everybody else wants you to do.
That's right.
And I love that. It's so genuine. And then when you do have guests on, like when you have guests on that are like big personalities, even if you are nervous or whatever, you really don't show it. So I dig that.
You know what's crazy, and I appreciate you saying that, and that's like the best compliment I could get because that is what it is. I really just turn the cameras on and we go. I don't get I don't really get nervous about anyone coming in here at this point because and I don't know if this is like a good thing, but first of all, I'm very grateful for every person that comes through here. Some people have a bigger profile than others, but like it's all the same thing to me. I'm in here locked in with them for however long we're going to do it, which is however long they want to go. And secondly, it's like, this is my job. Like
Right.
I gotta put food on the table. I got mouths to feed now, with Alessi. And it's like if I don't make a certain amount each month, I lose money. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I do have to be in a position where it's like I'm getting really, really great people to give me their time to come through here, and they expect me to be on the ball. So that's just what it is, and I think I kind of relish that. It's not nervousness so much as it is just like this is what I do. It's like you're
Right.
a professional at this, and we're gonna go in there and get this done. And I don't know, something really happens when I walk into this room. I'm the closest like when I'm doing this, it's like the one place left in my life where I can be completely myself, which is not the
Hey,
greatest thing right now, but
No, it
that's
is.
true.
It is actually because in my opinion, man, there's not enough real people out there.
Mm.
There's just not. The people that we see on podcasts and everything, like for with your show, and I do watch Danny Jones quite a bit. Joe Rogan is another one of my favorites. It's very hard to hide who you are, but
Oh yeah.
there's a lot of shows out there that do just that, that they over censor themselves. And I've noticed like it's very hard to get a genuine read on somebody when they don't share, those controversial feelings sometimes, because we're all
Yeah.
just people. And like I was saying, before we started this conversation, I'm really nervous for whatever reason. And like I have to keep telling myself, you're just a person just
I
like
am
me.
just a guy.
And so when I'm I'm thinking, and I'm thinking like, what am I going to ask this guy? What am I going to talk to this guy about? And really, honestly, man, I just wanted to have a conversation with you. Like the content that you have on your show is the stuff that you're interested in, and it's all stuff that I'm interested in. So we have that in common, and it's like one of my favorite shows that you did was David Satter,
Oh
and
yeah, I love David. Great guy.
it's that show like for whatever reason I find that people as they get older, they stop learning or they stop
Mm.
caring. They stop wanting to get extra knowledge and they get caught up in that rat race and they forget about certain things. But this conflict that's going on with Russia and Ukraine right now, that there's a lot of history there that's being
Oh yeah.
ignored
Oh
and
yeah.
the media ignores it. We ignore it. And like it's a lot more complex than it's just them fighting each other or we're fighting. It's there's a lot of complexities in there that people just don't know about because they don't know history.
That's right.
And the way David Satter presented on your show was he's interested in the history of everything, the region, the people, not just geopolitics.
That's right.
And I find myself diving deep into those subjects because I care, because I want to know more. And I think people lose that as they get older.
Yeah, man. And like David's the guy I just really appreciate. I've been able to have him on the podcast a couple times now. And, you know, of course, he has skin in the game on that conflict. It's been his life. I mean, for people that want the quick rundown on him that are unfamiliar, he was prior to this war happening, he was the only Western journalist that Putin ever banned from Russia. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was blowing the whistle, was really the only guy in the Western world blowing the whistle on some of the atrocities that Putin committed against his own people. And so, yeah, Putin's killed a lot of his friends, and he sees all the bad with him, which I agree with. I mean, the guy is not a good guy. But I appreciate the fact that he backs a lot of what he does with also being, like you said, literally one of the preeminent historians in the Western world on Russia over the past 120 years or so, specifically. And he may go a lot farther than that. Like back, I just have never really talked with him pre like 1900.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, whenever you have these conflicts like the ones we have going on in the world, there's people that have sides, there's people that have biases. We all have them. But I try to get, of course, everyone that comes in here is going to have that to some extent, but I try to get people who are going to be very, very diligent and reasonable about it, at least the best as I can see. And I think he was. I think a lot of that first podcast aged well. I think there's probably some things that, were problematic with some of the power structure in Ukraine that maybe David can see a little less because he's very familiar with how bad it can get in Russia. So I get that. But, that's why we bring in different people. And you obviously saw Mark Turner was also on my podcast, and
Yeah.
Mark has been on the ground there for a long time. The episode we did on the Ukraine war, and like he doesn't like Russia either, but he also recognizes, this is not good for anybody at this point. I mean,
Right.
it's war. It's
Right.
it's 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 horrible. It's destructive, and I think the for the crowd that recognizes like the threat Putin is as a guy, which I think is very overlooked now, the one thing that's working against them at this point, which is actually, I guess, kind of a good thing for the world, is that he doesn't have quite the juice behind him to be a real threat. That you're always a little nervous about the nukes thing that he does have. I don't want to discount that. But outside of that, like if you're comparing his military to like the United States or China, I mean, it's been proven that's not a fair comparison now. I mean that
Right.
like if we had to go head to head with just his military, the war would be over in 2 days.
Yeah.
That's how it appears. I mean, shout out to the people literally on the streets of Ukraine who are successfully like holding them back. We've been in this thing for over 2 years.
Right.
Like you gotta look at at stuff like that and then wonder what's the way out here. And I get it that the world is very concerned about, Putin's desire to create the old Russian Empire and all that, but
Yeah.
you also have to wonder how many more lives are we going to let be lost, even on both sides. Like a lot of the Russians who are fighting are kids. They're 18 years
Right.
old. They just got thrown in there. They don't know what they're fighting for, which is how a lot of war works, obviously.
Right. But here's something I gotta wonder, like if we do find a diplomatic solution, how long will it hold? Like,
Mm,
the Korean Peninsula is a good indicator of like where that can go. Like, and that's boiling over right now,
yeah.
and uh there's there is a ton of complexities there that we in the Western world just don't think of, because they've really been fighting each other for a long, like thousands of years, really. Like, so
Yeah.
it's not as simple as we try to make it out. Like, stop fighting. How long will that hold? How long will those? Because in my opinion, the whole landscape of that conflict really changed when Russia invaded, and then they really showed that they're not in it for resources. They're not in it for a land grab or anything like that. Like, what is going on? What are they going after?
Well,
And
I think they want some of that. It's just not maybe like, oh, let's take over Europe, right?
right,
Yeah.
right. That's where I was kind of like, where, how far are they willing to take that? And if Putin's saying, well, we're just trying to get the band back together for one more run, like, how far do we let that go? How far? Because like we've got skin in the game too, and I think if governments and superpowers all over the world were more honest with their people, I think that they get more out of it. Like what is our government's intention on keeping this conflict going the way it is? Like,
Yeah.
you gotta wonder where they're willing to take that, where Russia's willing to take their fight, and how far the Ukrainian people are willing to go themselves, because at some point those lives do matter,
Oh, of
and
course. Yeah.
but it's not like we here in the West we're thinking, okay, stop the fighting, and there's a diplomatic solution. But what if there's not? What if Russia wants all or nothing, and so does Ukraine?
Well, that's usually from what I see across history, that's where people start for sure. And then, there are some things that seem unsolvable. I would say the one that's way more unsolvable is Israel Palestine. I mean that,
Yeah,
that's a
that's
whole separate conversation. That's a mess, but it's been a mess for thousands of years. But I think mm, I love to study a lot of history, and history, it's a cliche, but it is 1,000% true. History repeats itself, and it doesn't necessarily repeat itself like, oh, the same exact thing happened. It
yeah,
repeats itself in that, in the context of the world that now exists, the behaviors that humans have done to the good or the bad in the past will repeat themselves. This is proven. You look at it throughout thousands of years, that's how it goes down. And I also find myself very much hopelessly in the middle of some of these patterns that I see form. So, what do I mean by this? Let's start with this. There's two main crowds that exist. And if we keep it United States centric for a second, it's actually bipartisan because within both parties there are these two crowds that exist, right? And that is the isolationists and the people who, some of whom are like military industrial complex literal supporters. Others, most are just passively doing it and don't realize they're doing it. But neither of those two crowds are right, in my opinion.
right,
When you look at history, let's start with the isolationist crowd. Libertarians have amazing intentions. Amazing intentions. Some of their
yeah,
ideas are incredible. So do socialists when you're talking to people who aren't going to be like the power hungry communist leaders themselves.
yeah,
Some of their ideas are incredible. Mathematically, for both of those two forms of thought, when you get above a certain population size within a community, and I don't remember, I think there is like a real number for that they've studied, but I don't remember what it is, but it's not high. Once you get above that, it doesn't work because you have
Right.
too many individuals who will veer off the tracks of what is a very, very hard belief system. So when you have the reason I brought up libertarians in particularly is because they are rabid isolationists.
Yeah.
In America, they want to stay out of all wars. They don't want to fund all these other wars, which they have a really good point there. Like bookmark that as well. But war is something that I think is an absolute last resort. I think it is fucking horrible. Like
Yeah.
there's really nothing worse that human beings do to each other than warfare. Unfortunately, I live in reality of a world with 8 billion people where once in a while it is necessary. Now you say,
Yeah.
oh, well, what's once in a while? Well, that's the $1 trillion question. Like, do I think the Iraq war was a good idea? No, I do not. And I think we had information at the time to be able to say it wasn't a good idea back then.
Right.
Right? There are some wars it's like, well, hindsight's 2020. And it's like, okay, that one you could, especially knowing what was kept from us and hidden, you could say that one we shouldn't have done. But others, it's like, oh, I don't know. And so if you look at that isolationist thought, look at the last time that this was a major, major problem in the United States. And that was in the build
World
up
War
to World
II.
War
Yeah.
II. Yeah. So I think it was, we looked it up yesterday with something, I think it was like 70 to 85 million people died in World War II.
Man.
We did not get involved as a country, the United States, until December 1941, and we were spinning up the military for a couple months, whatever it was, 2, 3 months before that. So we didn't get involved in fighting until 1942. That war began in the spring of 1939
Yeah.
when Hitler broke all the bullshit agreements that he had signed with the UK and particularly, but like saying, I'm not going to go take these lands and whatever, for instance, Poland, stuff like that. He walked all over these diplomats for years and people could see what he was doing. When all that happened, a little known part of history is that back in the United States, people wanted fucking nothing to do with it. It's not like,
Yeah.
oh, well, let's monitor this and check it out. People were like, fuck that. Let Europe do their little war. Now
And I
let's
think that was in large because of the World War One. I think a lot of that carried
absolutely,
over from World War One. We don't want the bodies stacking up like they did in World War.
absolutely. That's one reason. I think that's probably the biggest reason. You got to remember these, as you just pointed out, these people were about 2 decades off World War One. You know, that's their fathers and their brothers and stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
people are thinking about that. And that was a brutal, brutal war that we ignore in history a lot just because World War II ended up being even more insane.
Yeah.
But the other reason was we were coming off the Great Depression. And so economically at home, people were still trying to figure shit out. They wanted to take care of ourselves, America. Like, why are we going to go spend all this money on a war while people here are still starving in some cases, right? We were coming out of it, but you know, there were certainly still issues in the economy. It got so bad though, the attitude that once Hitler had taken Poland, he had taken the Sudetenland, Austria, all these countries. He had taken France even. France, I think, fell officially in, I want to say, August 1940. Throughout July 1940, you could even say May, but say July 1940 through the end of the year, Hitler put on one of the biggest bombing campaigns of all time all over Great Britain, who
Yeah.
was a very close ally of ours. They literally speak our same language. They were allies with us in World War One, and they were this close to being taken by the Nazis. And that entire time, Winston Churchill, who was a huge fan of America, was trying like crazy to get FDR to give some support in this wars. He already had the case study. Like, look, this dude's broken every agreement. He's taking all of Europe. He's bombing me every fucking day. And FDR refused to do it. Now, here's the defense of FDR, and it's the unfortunate thing about politics. FDR had an election on November 5th, 1940. And you know what his opponent, something, I think his name was like Roger Wilkie or something like that. You know what his main calling card was on the campaign trail?
What's that?
We are not going to send our boys to war. This
Yeah.
president's a warmonger and all this stuff. Sound very familiar, right?
Yeah. It's still happening. Yeah.
Yeah. So FDR had to literally change the language of how he talked to people that included removing phrases that were going to get him in trouble later to make it seem like he was fully isolationist. It got so strong on that even that when there was like this deal where Churchill said, "Hey, you guys, Congress voted and just barely missed the vote a couple years ago to basically destroy these 50 old ships that were already destroyed, that basically say, like, let's scrap like 50 ships that we're not even using as the military."
Yeah.
They hadn't done it. And Britain was so desperate that Churchill said, "Fuck it, I'll take them.
Yeah,
And
bring them. Yeah.
I'll give you in exchange a 99-year lease on all of our colonial ports in the North American and South American regions," something like that. FDR couldn't even do that deal because it was going to be politically a disaster. They had to change the language of how that happened. So you have this whole thing going on, this crazy person leading an attack across Europe, bombing the shit out of Britain, and the US wouldn't get involved because people at home were like, "Fuck that war." It
Right.
took over a year after that until December 1941 when we got the shit kicked out of us at home in a surprise attack. It was a horrible event, the worst thing until we saw 9/11 at Pearl Harbor. That's the only reason we got into the war. And at that point, Hitler had fucking all of Europe. He was working on trying to go into the Soviet Union. He had all of North Africa. People were dying left and right. The Holocaust is way underway. And now, when America goes into the war, yes, obviously us, the Soviets, British, as well as some of the colonial countries that Britain had, who were a part of those armies. Yeah, we came in, we won the war. But why did the war have to end up being till 1945? If you
Yeah.
take action in 1939, that war's done in 1940. I'm
Right.
pretty confident in that. The
And so
minute that,
are we
yeah, go
seeing
ahead.
that right now with the these worldwide conflicts right now and heading so I
Well,
watch quite a
that's what
bit
I
of Ryan
struggle with.
Macbeth. I
That's what I
watched
struggle with.
quite a bit of Ryan Macbeth, and he believes that World War III started back in 2014. And he's got an interesting take on the military industrial complex. We'll get
Yep.
into that in a little bit, but um, that's what I struggle. I struggle with finding that dialogue with people that I know. And like, I'm very
Yeah.
interested in this stuff. I'm very interested in world history. I'm very interested in conflict in general for whatever reason. I find that very weird myself, but I struggled to find that dialogue with people that I know, people in my area, because like most people don't care unless it affects them. And what they don't
Yeah.
understand is it really is affecting you. You just, it's hitting your pocketbook right now, which later on, it's going to affect lives instead of just your pocketbook. And
Yeah.
if people understood the knowledge that they need to know isn't what they want to know. Like there's so much, and if you look at it as entertainment, history can be very fun, you know.
Oh, yeah. Of course it is. Yeah.
And I find a struggle finding people to have that dialogue with, and like one of the questions I had in my mind is, how old are you?
I'm 31.
So I'm 39, and so like there's a large difference between age, but I find myself identifying with you more on your because you're a very curious person and you
Mm,
want to know things
yeah.
and you want to learn, like, and you yourself, if you have time to sit down and listen to a 3 hour podcast on history, or you will do that, or you will turn one on while you're working in the background and listen to things that you're interested in. And the things that you're interested in is knowledge, and that's, I find that fascinating about you in particular, but like podcasts in general right now are headed that direction, and I'm it's pretty exciting to see it go that direction. And I think people, the more they learn about other people and the way we live versus the way they live, and that conflicts are going to happen, and the reasons why are very complex, but sometimes we do have to get involved.
Yeah. And I think unfortunately today it's so easy for the public division to be heated, right? Like if I'm a
Yeah.
foreign government, I can get Americans to hate each other because I have the internet now. Back then, it was a
Yeah.
little harder. You had to be more strategic. And I sure as shit don't ever want to argue for like the military industrial complex side of things. I think the Ryan McBeth's argument is hilarious. I completely disagree with him on that. He's also very, very
He's part of
like
that complex.
he says that with, in my opinion, and I don't know him, but the way it comes across is he says that with such a disdain for anyone who would even dare to question that he's wrong about that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think
So
I don't like that.
the way I kind of took it is, yeah, the same way that you took it, but the way I kind of look at it is the military industrial complex does exist, but it's kind of necessary.
I don't think the complex itself is necessary. I think war as a last resort is necessary, and being well funded to be able to rain hell if you have to is necessary. I don't think
That,
it's a
yeah,
good
that,
idea to be an isolationist. I also think it is very difficult to determine when you have the war where it is Hitler or something. Finally, I think that people overuse the terms like Hitler and Stalin like crazy these days,
yeah,
and they want to label everyone that. And unfortunately, sometimes people are just really bad people. And unfortunately, sometimes those people happen to be in charge of another country. And unfortunately, sometimes some really, really bad shit happens as a result of that, where a lot of people die. And unfortunately, sometimes there actually is really nothing for us to do about that. And that is something
yeah,
people don't want to hear on the military industrial complex side. But you could make this argument with Saddam. Saddam was a fucking horrible dude, one of the worst guys ever. The shit he did to his people was terrible. You know, the guy was he was scum.
but he was better than
But
what happened next.
that's exactly right. We took the
Yeah.
moral high ground of, well, we got to take him out. Then we created a vacuum and it became ISIS, right?
So it like then the same argument can be said about Russia right now. Like
It could.
with so with Putin, I don't think I don't know where you stand on this, but I don't think Putin's crazy. I think Hitler was insane. I
He
really do
was.
think Hitler was crazy, but I don't think Putin is crazy. I think he's smart and I think he's Russian. You know, that's
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think I agree with you. He's not. I go back and forth sometimes, wonder if he's crazy. But I will say, as this war settled in, and we got like a year out, I didn't want to get complacent about it. But I'm like, okay, he's just kind of evil, but he's like, he does have intelligence. You have to say that, and there's a little more control than maybe I expected him to
yeah.
have. That's not to say any of the stuff he's doing is great. I also don't think it's a great idea to carry his water with, some of his, like taking his side, as I see some people doing in America. However,
Yeah.
I empathize with people who have been maybe going over to almost take his side on stuff because they are very pissed about the not only the proxy war and funding billions and billions of dollars into Ukraine into what is an unwinnable war against what appears to be a paper tiger, by the way, but also because it's like a mortal sin in some circles to even discuss whether or not there is some corruption in Ukraine or some mistakes on the part of NATO that don't help when you have a dictator on the other side
Yeah.
of this issue. Those are things that have to be talked about. And if you don't
Yeah.
want to, like, I haven't listened to this back, obviously. We're just talking right now, but I would imagine you could probably hear the strong nuance in all these issues that we've already been talking about that I have for it because these things are complicated.
Yeah.
People want to simplify all these issues. They are not that. They are extremely complicated. Personalities abound, and you're never going to get everything of what you want, and you're never going to have a perfect situation with the different people in charge. You're going to want this guy in charge instead of that guy, and then they're going to want this guy instead of that guy. It
Right.
is how it is. You make a good point that could it cause some sort of weird power vacuum in Russia if a guy like Putin, who has been, the steady,
He's
pretty
been the
much
guy for
leader,
like 25 years.
yeah, if you suddenly took that out because you wanted to say, yay, democracy, you know, that's not really, that's not necessarily how it works, right? You're
Right. The
dealing
next
with an
man up may be
entirely different
twice as bad.
culture. Could be that, or like the next man up could be whacked by someone and start this whole civil conflict that
Right.
gets really bad, right? And these are valid questions to ask. It is, once again, I want to hit on this again. It is a very valid question for people in America to ask, be concerned, and fed up with spending billions of dollars on both of these wars, because we
Yeah.
also don't have boots on the ground. They are proxy wars. So when people
Yeah.
say to that military industrial complex, I'm not going to look at them and tell them they're wrong. I'm going to
Right.
tell them that maybe not all the people are evil or whatever. There might be a handful back there, in these companies and even in the government or whatever. But it's more like passive, like, well, we don't want this one to be Hitler. And that's how they keep on telling
Right.
themselves, oh, just the next one. Oh, just the next one. Oh,
Right. So you
and
kind
then
of have
it's
to
a
you kind
slippery
of have to
slope.
be like, at what point do we intervene
That's right.
and kind of stick with that, that ideology throughout, world conflicts or whatever, like that we are involved in. And as far as Ukraine being a proxy conflict, yeah, it is. But they asked for our help. So I kind of look at it differently. So you got Zelensky out there campaigning for,
Hmm.
funding. And so when you got things like that, I don't look at it as like a proxy conflict, although it is. They did ask for help. So I mean, it it's complicated.
Yeah,
It's very nuanced. And to if we sit back and stay out of it completely, like Ukraine would have been rolled over by now. You know, I mean,
that's probably right. Yeah, I would agree
and
with that.
I mean, you look at Israel, the Israel-Palestine conflict. We mentioned that, and that's kind of a proxy conflict as well. I
It's a
mean,
complete
because
proxy conflict.
yeah,
We're
you've
funding
got
we're funding them like crazy.
well, and then I wonder, because Iran and Russia are so close, if that has anything to do with one another.
Mm,
I mean, you got the Russia-Ukraine conflict. That United States is carrying billions into Ukraine, and then the people that Russia are working with start a war over here. You know what I'm saying?
the one thing is Israel. I have a lot of thoughts on that actual war and some of the failure of leadership, and I mean it's an ugly war what we see going on, and there's
Yeah,
children who are being indiscriminately killed. I got a lot of problems with those things. Not looking at that yet, and just looking at the general issue in the Middle East, not Israel Palestine, just Israel and the Middle East. I understand Israel's position of constantly wanting to give the United States an incentive to be over there, because there's like 9 million of them and billions of people who probably don't like them in that same area. And when their best friend, the United States, is not around with them and isn't helping back them, they feel very threatened. And I get that.
yeah,
That said, that's how you get into an Iraq war, for example.
yeah.
I mean, Netanyahu went to Congress, I think it was in 2002, and asked us to do war on Iraq and Iran. Can you
I
imagine
didn't
that
know
if we'd
that.
done
No, I
both,
didn't know that.
right? And like this is what they've always wanted. And I get it. Iran has as a part of their charter the destruction of the state of Israel. So trust me, like I get that. But we need to ask ourselves as well, how do I want to put this? What kind of minimal backing it takes to be able to at least avoid war and keep, I guess, like Israel safe from Iran, right?
Yeah,
Instead of like, oh, let's just bomb the shit out of Iran and now maybe start World War III. Because by the way, China don't like Israel. I mean, check me on this. I don't. I have Google open behind you, but I'm like busy talking right now. I'm not sure. Like I'm pretty sure they don't have Israel recognized on their map,
Yeah.
right? China also has some stuff that's been going back and forth with Iran for a while. And we know well about China and Russia getting a little cozy on stuff. So, yeah, you could escalate a World War III type scenario if you just indiscriminately said, oh, let's just bomb Iran. Trust me, I think the Iranian leadership's terrible. I think the world would be an amazing place without them there. But again, I'm trying to think about, we're talking hundreds of thousands of lives in that case, maybe, versus tens of millions, or at this point, maybe hundreds of millions of lives if, God forbid, there was some sort of World War III scenario. So this is exactly what I mean. The isolationists are not, that's totally unrealistic. And I
Yeah.
just don't think that's a good idea. But like the alternative of like, yeah, use the war machine, go around, spread democracy, that's a terrible idea too.
Yeah, and
And so
it kind of brought us the Cold War, didn't it?
yeah, but well, and the Cold War, the way people thought about in that war was crazy, which, that's
I
that's
don't
a
think
whole
it's
nother,
over. I don't think it's over.
the Cold
I,
War.
yeah, myself, like it's just a new stage of the Cold War. I mean,
Yeah, you
the
can make that
Soviet
argument for
Union
sure.
fell, but the Russian government didn't, you know. So, and not only that, but now it's transferred more to China as well. Like China's got I mean, their military is trying to compete with ours.
Yeah,
So,
China's a far bigger concern. That is the reality. And that's the point. It's like you got to be so careful with the Hitler thing because yes, I see Putin. He does want a land grab, but again, he's not going like across Europe, and people will be like, "Oh, well, Hitler just started with the Sudetenland or something."
right.
Hitler had a fucking really good army.
Yeah.
He had a world class army. They were probably the best in the world, almost
And
across the board.
our current military has a lot of similarities.
Sure,
Yeah.
Russia don't got that.
No.
At no point does Russia have that. The only thing we talk about with Russia to have concern with is nuclear missiles. And to go back to your Cold War point, there were actually psychos, a lot of them, and I'll call them that, in the government during the Cold War who thought about this shit in terms of 240 to 60. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is they literally thought of the world like a football game with people's lives in the sense that they're like, okay, well, if Russia hit us, we'd lose 60, but our return hit would cost them 240, so we win.
And see,
That's how they looked at it.
that drives me nuts too, that essentially like our world militaries are just pawns for those in power.
That's right.
And that that drives me nuts. And I commented on one of your shorts one time. I think it was one of your shorts. And that's that my comment, and I'm paraphrasing now, was something to the effect of that's why always support my troops. Um,
Yeah,
because I understand those troops aren't those troops are by and large doing what they're told, and they're being like why we do need militaries and stuff like that. Our troops don't always have a choice in what they're doing, and
that's
so
100% right.
I
They never
choose to
do.
support the person in the uniform versus the uniform most of the time.
I agree with your stance there a lot. And I talk about this with my military guys I bring on all the time, especially the dudes who are veterans of like the Iraq War. When we go to then talk about litigating that war, which inevitably comes up for all those guys, I'm always the first to set the stage there and be like, hey, not your problem,
Yeah,
right? Like there's a couple million people in the military, I think it is. Yeah, like anything else, are there a few bad apples in there? You get your people who do like an Abu Ghraib thing. Sure. By and
yeah,
large, these people are amazing people who have signed up to sacrifice their life for the country. I think that's like the greatest thing ever. And so when
yeah,
they are sent into war by people wearing fucking suits, sitting in a cushy office somewhere, that's not their fault. Once they get there, their job is their job and their orders are their orders, and that's what they're going to do. It's never, ever, you know, them like making these decisions.
right.
It's just how that works. And I always like to separate that because yeah, I do want our military very well funded. And people say, "Oh, well, that's the military industrial complex." Listen, man, if you have something to
Defense costs
protect,
money.
you want a moat around your place. You want the
Yeah.
dogs out front. You want, the guy up in guy with the six shooter ready to go. If someone tries to start shit, that's how things work.
Yeah.
The idea is that hopefully you just don't really have to use it. But like if we were having this conversation, if a war broke out, I'm gonna make something up right here, but like if a war broke out between China and Ukraine back in 2022, and people wanted to say, "Uh-oh, this is like Hitler," because then China rolled right over Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yeah, would I probably be pounding the war drums? Yeah. Yeah, I would. It's just these crises we have had come up, which is Ukraine, Russia, and Israel, Palestine. I am not
Yeah.
because they alone, those armies, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, and Hamas, which isn't even an army, they're a terrorist group. They're not taking over the world
Right.
from a mathematical standpoint. They are not taking over. It's not possible on their own. Right? So when I see a threat where, and again, I'm just a guy guessing here, but when I see a threat where it's like the math could be on their side there and they start doing very aggressive things that include taking over other people's without their permission, or
Right.
declaring war on countries for horrible reasons, yeah, then I'll say that. It's just, I'm not going to be a no matter what isolationist on stuff. I'm going to judge things on a case by case. At the moment, if you hear how I'm talking, obviously I have a little bit more of an isolationist bend. That doesn't mean that that bend extends to how we handle ourselves in the world. I'm not one of these guys like, just get everyone back over here. We'll worry about us. You guys all stay over there. I'm not like that at
Right.
all. The isolationist bend is strictly on the are we putting boots on the ground with war and firing up the Northrop Grumman Lockheed Martin machine, right?
Yeah.
So right now, yeah, no, and I don't want to do that. And I think when guys like Ryan Macbeth speak about the way they do, I think it's naive at best and callous at worst, right?
Right.
And again, I don't know him, so I don't want to be too accusatory. I just didn't really. It's never good when people kind of laugh that they have a hot take like that and then like
Yeah.
laugh at you like what do you know? And it's like, I'm not going to pretend to know as much as you, man, but
Right.
you
That's a little
can't just say
callous.
something that
Yeah.
like 99.9% of people completely disagree with and act like, yeah, I'm the only one that knows. Like
Well, and
that's not
he
real.
also talked about the money aspect of it and how much each one makes in profit or whatever. And like,
Hmm.
I don't, military contracts are a lot of that stuff is like hidden numbers. They don't tell you all about the
That's
stuff.
right.
Like, and some of those black programs are funded by themselves. Like
That's
they
right.
fund themselves literally. So we're not going to know any of that information ever. And so I disagree with the money aspect because like some of those black programs aren't legal to be shared, so we'll never know.
These are public companies too. A lot of them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that's
Or at
ridiculous.
or at the very least, yeah, probably actually you're probably right about that. But side issue, even at the very least, some of the companies that end up getting involved are these, they got business, their business, just like I'm trying to be a business, right? They got people to pay, they got
Yeah.
bills to pay. You're constantly fighting for survival. Money is the quite literally the economic incentive for us to be able to survive, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of people. Let's think of the biggest companies like Lockheed Martin. There's a lot of people there who, if they went home and like senior people and looked themselves in the mirror and said, am I a military industrial complex believer? Absolutely not. And they're not lying to themselves when they say that. But their actions look like it because they have a quarterly report to get to every 3 months and they better fucking hit it. And so if someone comes to you and says, well, we don't want to escalate this conflict, so we're not going to need contracts. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. We said we were going to do 25 F-15 fighter jets for this year, and now you're not going to do that. Well, have you thought about whether or not it could actually be a threat in country X and you may need them? So, maybe we should get those things. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
becomes they're not trying to be like, let's just go kill everybody. But the end result is that's what it looks like. And that
Yeah.
is like, even before you get to some people who actually might be a little evil or straight up evil, like that's the military complex before anything, in my opinion.
That's what makes
Yeah,
it the military industrial complex, is because like these little people down here are building these puzzle pieces, and eventually that's what we have the industry at the top of finished
that's right.
products.
That's right.
uh, I like Sean Ryan was on your show. I really like Sean Ryan
Great
because
guy.
he's genuine, and that guy's just as curious as we are. And I we were talking about Iraq, and his take on the Afghanistan conflict is kind of heartbreaking, because you listen. We were talking about supporting your troops and stuff, and the pullout of Afghanistan was totally messed up.
Horrible. Yeah.
And I heard I can't remember who he was talking to. I I believe it's not important. He was talking to somebody, and he's like, you know, why did we do all that stuff? And those are the questions that he has and his buddies that were over there. Why were we there? Why did we do all this if you were just going to do what you did? Why did we leave all this stuff there? Why did we go over there and inject ourselves in people's lives? Why did we take all these lives for essentially right now it's for nothing.
Yeah. And it always saddens me when, especially like a veteran, has to ask those questions and wonder. And I, it's not even just to try to be like positive or optimistic. I'd like to think things aren't for nothing, that there's some good that those guys can find for themselves from that. But yeah, when you look at it from a geopolitical standpoint, it sure as shit looks like it was for nothing.
Yeah.
You can't deny that. The same guys we took down took over the country and used all the weapons we left behind for them. It was one of the worst executed military endeavors in modern history. Our pull out of there. So yeah, it's I really have trouble hearing that when it's guys like Sean who are asking those questions, because they've been there, they've lived that. They sacrifice for this kind of thing, and when you feel like some suits in DC fuck it all up,
Yeah.
yeah, you're pissed. And I don't know if this was the guy he was talking to, but he might have been saying that with the guy who got caught in that bomb at the airport.
No, I now I'm thinking about. I think it was Tucker Carlson.
Okay. Well,
Oh,
either way, he's had on, like, you saw that one dude. This is maybe like over a year ago now. He had this guy on who, right at the pullout, they weren't able to do their job, and he ended up being caught. He'd lost like multiple limbs, and yeah,
yeah.
he's got to live with that for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
What did he do? He did nothing to deserve that. And yeah, damn right. That makes me angry when I see that. And I'm sure it makes Sean even a lot angrier with his personal ties to those types of situations. So
Yeah, I got
it's
buddies that weren't even involved in that conflict, and they're pissed off. Yeah, I'm military veterans.
yeah, man.
They're upset, and
I
it's
don't I
they
don't know
said it
any
was
military veterans that aren't.
the one friend in specific that I I reference when I'm talking about this is he said it almost makes his military service kind of worthless, because
Mm,
he was involved in the first Gulf War, and so he was stationed in Korea, and he's had a very long look at all the things going on over there, and he said it's very upsetting to see that all his work that he did, all the stuff that they did over there was for nothing.
yeah, that's really that's like I said, that's really tough to hear. But I'd like to think it's not all for that. I mean, like, look,
Yeah.
the best thing we can do now is try to learn lessons from this stuff. And that's why it gets frustrated with some of these proxy wars. It feels like we're not learning good lessons. And, again, for example, in the Middle East, I totally understand Israel's position. We also have to understand our own. And so we may line up with Israel on a lot of things, There is no country in the world, though, including them, that you line up with 100% of things on. And
Absolutely.
so that may include saying, like, no, we're not going to go start a war with Iran. I understand you want that. We're going to help protect you. So that, Iran's they never dropped a nuke on Israel. It's not to say they won't figure out a way to end up getting a nuke. I mean, that's a whole
Right.
separate issue. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's not to say they won't end up figuring it out and then doing it, but like, yeah, we maybe a better way to handle that is monitoring it rather than actually like trying to make it happen.
Yeah, I was gonna
Right?
say, are we pushing that to happen?
Yes, it's like when you when there's someone who's bad and you just want to fuck them up to fuck them up. As much as that feels like justice, and it is, to be clear, when we like get that testosterone going in our head in those types of conflicts and maybe do that, there's collateral damage that ends up happening. Not all the time, but sometimes.
Yeah, we've talked about
And
that before on the show.
yeah.
Generational hate came from a
Oh
lot of that stuff
yeah.
over there. Yeah.
Oh my God. Like, you know, what happened on October 7th was obviously terrible.
Yeah.
And what those I mean, it was just terrible. You have to look at the root cause though to try to figure out how to prevent this in the future. And no, I also don't blame Israel for all this. I think it's a very difficult situation. However, when Israel gave Palestine the Gaza Strip in, I believe it was 2006, 2005, 2006, and they pulled out from the area, they still had to worry about their borders because there's people who are going to be in there who do hate them. I
Yeah.
want you to imagine if Iraq was where Mexico is in 2006. You think anyone would argue against a border wall? No, the fuck they would not. They would
Right.
they'd be out there, I'll bring the bricks, right?
Right.
So when Israel did that, it was a lose-lose situation. And I'm going to bring this back to October 7th in a second. There's four borders around Gaza. The north and the east are Israel. Obviously, they can't risk having those borders be completely open and stuff like
Right.
that. That's just a reality. And I know people at home don't want to hear that, but it's a reality. The west border is the sea. And once you get whatever it is, 3-4 miles out into the sea, you are now in some form of whatever. I probably have the mileage wrong, but like you get out into international waters and you can rope around and go into Israel and attack it, right?
Right.
So Israel has to patrol that. So when they patrol, and I haven't gotten to the southern border, when they patrol the north, the east, and the west borders, on the west border, they have to patrol before the coral reef is, meaning there's no fish industry in Gaza. So there's something, an easy type of industry gone. Economically, they have no shot. The north and east borders, they can't just be letting people come in. There's not like Palestinian businesses happening in Ukraine. So like, or in Israel.
Right.
So it basically boxes them in, and you say, well, what about the southern border? That's the Sinai Peninsula, which is a no man's land. There's terrorist groups down there who don't give a fuck about the Palestinians. They'll just kill them or recruit them or tell them they have to work for them, I should say. And it's like there's nothing there. So even though Israel created a situation where it's like, okay, we'll give you some land. I guess good job, like give them something. It then did create a kind of imprisoned type structure.
Yeah.
That
And
is what it is.
where you're going to get generational hate from the
Yeah,
kids growing up in it there because like
that's right.
we can't get out. We
The
want to
average
get out, but we can't.
the average age of the terrorists who did October 7th was in the neighborhood of 20 years old. It happened towards the end of 2023. So do math, minus 20. Those kids were born in 2003 on average. Some of them were younger too.
Yeah.
So they were 2 years old when Israel gave away Gaza. They don't have a memory of anything other than the box that they've lived in. And
Yeah.
I want to be very clear here. The scum, you get to an older age and you're doing stuff like that, like you're a terrorist, like that's garbage. But I want to learn from what made that child grow into that adult. And if you are not willing to have that conversation, yeah, you're a part of the problem.
Yeah.
And most people on that issue are not having that conversation. And it's just going to happen again. I mean, I'm very it's very sad. I'm such an emotional guy that I still just go like, "Oh God," when I
Yeah.
look at this stuff. But I'm also cynical that like I'll be still looking at this in 10 years. Maybe it won't be in Gaza, maybe it'll be in the West Bank. It'll be somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
I don't know
And
if that's cynical or real, you
well,
know?
that's the problem. I think it's 100% real. I mean,
Yeah.
you show me on that issue where anyone's ever really gotten close to solving it. The 93 Oslo Accords were a joke. That didn't do
Yeah.
shit, right? Like they don't want to. There's there's actual hatred.
Yeah.
The sides view themselves, view the other as subhuman.
Yeah.
When has that ever been had a good ending in human history?
Never, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I don't remember hearing in the history books anybody climbing out of stuff like that. And
I don't know
it
what
still
that is.
happens.
I don't know what that is about us that about humans that like we can do that even at this point. But like, man, it's still happening like crazy around the world.
Yeah, I'm an emotional person, like you. And when the invasion of Ukraine happened, I stayed awake. Um, that happened pretty late our time, and I stayed awake into the early hours in the morning watching. And I remember thinking, man, all my kids are going to know is war because we just got out of a 20-year conflict, and here we are rolling into this stuff. And I was very emotional that night. And I remember calling my wife, and I was like, look, all our kids are going to know is war. And that's a very sad and realistic view of what's going on right now. It's not going to stop anytime soon, and we kind of have to wonder why all the time. And
Yeah.
I see. So, like one of the guys that you have on, one of my favorite guests of yours is Andrew Bustamante, and
Yeah.
that guy is brilliant. I don't know how
Yeah, he
people
is.
like. I'm even if he was still CIA, which whatever.
Very well
Even
might
if he
be.
even if he was like, man, that guy's got some great viewpoints. And when he talks about like he wants to leave the United States eventually, I
Mhm.
think he's got a 3 or 4 year plan, is what he said. And his talk behind that is like, look, we were immigrants when we came here. When we started this whole project here of the United States, we were all immigrants, and none of us really want to think about like, what if it's that time to immigrate again? Because
Yeah.
our government has kind of turned into what they ran away from.
Can you expand upon that?
So, like colonialism and all that stuff. So in my opinion, the United States started with a bunch of guys that just didn't want to pay their taxes, and
Yeah.
we're essentially in a spot where the government kind of runs our lives still. Like again, and like I can't say what it's like in other countries because I've never been outside of the United States. I'm trying to. I love to travel, and so I will eventually want to get out into Europe, Mexico, and travel around the world. But I don't. I do have a very closed in view of how my government is versus how the rest of the world is. And in
Mm.
my opinion, there are some of the things that they ran away from back in the day that our government's kind of into now, like conflicts and um, the CIA. Like did I'm sure like things like CIA existed for England back in, or the United Kingdom back when we
Yeah, it
became a
did.
thing.
Hmm.
I'm sure that's one of the things they ran away from. And are we getting to that inflection point where our government is not thinking about us? They're thinking more about themselves, And Andrew Bustamante puts it like this: continuity of government is really all that matters to government.
So, in when you say continuity of government and you're referring to what he's talking about, did he say that about the US government?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know
Um,
he talks
like
about that
a
with
lot of
collegiate
people,
culture.
like say like we're of the people, for the people, by the people, and I don't think our government looks at it like that anymore.
Oh no, I think the government has the same economic type incentives that we've been talking about already.
Yeah.
And they're just people and we
Yeah,
are
that's
flawed,
true. That's
you
true.
know? That we are humans are flawed. You and me are like when we get into certain positions, we can make the wrong decisions. And man, there's a lot on the bone there. So I hear
It is a
Andy's
lot to
points.
unpack. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear Andy's points. And Andy's a good friend of mine. Been really, really good to me. Great guy. He and I disagree on some stuff a lot. And just because I'm some dude in an armchair and he was in the CIA doesn't mean he's right about all of them. I do
Yeah.
think sometimes there's a curve on stuff because I'm like, well, he's seen shit I can't even, whatever. But I don't want to just use that as a cop out to anything he says. You understand what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So if I feel like there's things that really can be challenged, I will. He's also changed my mind on stuff before,
Yeah.
and that's I don't think that's just a credit to being like a slick talker. I think it's because he'll present decent evidence on some things and over time be like, oh, that evidence is a little better than what I was working with. So, I don't agree that it's time for us to immigrate again. However, I understand why he's thinking the way he thinks, especially given the life that he's had to live. He
Yeah.
always has to plan. It's like what's that line in the movie Heat where De Niro's like never be with someone that you couldn't abandon around the corner in a split of a second.
Right.
I mean, I just fucked up that line, but people know what it is.
Paraphrasing. Yeah.
That is the world that Andy Bustamante knows.
Yeah.
And that even does extend to the United States itself, which I can tell you, some people may have some wild disagreements with some of his ideas, but like he does love the US. Like he really, really loves this place.
Oh yeah.
And
I don't think he would have had the career he had if he didn't.
that, yeah. And, you know, I think that he's concerned with the incompetency that he sees across the government, which he says also in certain contexts falls to the CIA, even though he defends them on a lot of things that some people are like, well, wait a minute, they definitely did X, Y, or Z. You can disagree on those things. That's fine. And I do, you know, but when he talks about it like, hey, it's still a government organization. So forget all the actual events and stuff. There's still some of the same stupid paper pushing shit that happens that then adds up and causes stupid bureaucracy to make
Yeah.
us miss things and stuff like that. Like he's seen that. And that concerns me. So when he's talking about leaving and stuff like that, he's got that in his head. Like, oh, what if, fucking Karen at the CIA does this shit I know she did in 2015 again, and this time it's a bigger deal.
Right.
Like I that's way
I'll
oversimplifying it,
tell
but
you
I hope people can follow that point.
the first thing I thought of when it like so I've gone back and forth on how I took that. Um, the first thing I thought of was, oh well, you're giving a give up on the United States. I see, you know.
Mm,
Um, I'm I don't think of things like that. Like the incompetency. uh, It is scary, but I know that's why the checks and balances are there. I know shit's gonna happen. It's shit's always gonna happen. But I think I've got a really biased view because I've never been outside of the United States, but also as an American, like I've never been outside of the United States. So trust me, bro, right?
yeah.
Um, I I don't see our home like that. I don't even if our government was to become like tyrannical, I think I could still live here, because this is all I know, you know?
Yeah. It also is such a pendulum too. And I have some hope with this. It's like you look at our history after World War II, right? Truman, Eisenhower, right? Left, right.
Yeah.
Kennedy, Nixon.
Yeah.
Like, well, Kennedy slash LBJ, obviously, because Kennedy got whacked.
Right.
Nixon. Nixon has to leave office for Ford because he has to leave office early. Carter. Carter fucked some stuff up. Reagan. Reagan's the one who bought an extra 4 years on the end with George H.W. Bush, but then Bill Clinton came in, got 8 years. Then
Yeah.
Bush 2 comes in, gets 8 years. He fucks everything up. Horrible presidency. Obama then comes in for 8 years. And then people get pissed towards the end of Obama, so Trump comes in for 4. We're in the middle of this crazy cycle right now. Biden comes in for 4 after that. And now you're probably statistically looking at 4 more at Trump because the pendulum has swung the other way. The nice thing about America, and I hope it's not like the pattern is the wheels on the train are getting too fast that it's going to go off the rails, but like we have proven we're kind of a victim to that pendulum all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it does even some things out, even when I think we get a lot of bad presidents in there. I want to be clear about that. I think, unfortunately, if you look over the last 50 years, we've had more that are bad than good. But there's something about that that makes me think we'll be all right. You know, we'll
Yeah.
be okay. It's just the 500-pound elephant in the room is the ability of every one of us to get in fights on the internet and have our psyche changed by algorithms that are not decided by us, which I see. I mean, I see it even with pretty much almost every person I bring in here. I
Yeah.
could guess what their algorithm looks like because I'm crazy. Like I go hunting for all content. So my like if people look through my phone, they'd be like, "What the fuck?" I mean, it's
Right.
got everything on it, but that's like because it's kind of my job, right?
Right.
But most people, even people who they're in this kind of thing where it's their job, they still just scroll for whatever they're looking, whatever's given to them, and it just creates this over and over again. Like there was something, I won't say what it was, but there was something that this week I just had the biggest opinion on, like the biggest opinion, and I kept getting the content that would more support that opinion. And it was like, nah, this was like 5, 6 straight days. This is over the last couple of weeks. And then yesterday, I went in and I said, let's go for all the other stuff on the complete opposite end and
Right.
kind of reset the algorithm. And by the way, I found some very fair points on the opposite end where I'm like, oh, I don't want to agree with it. Fuck. You
Yeah.
know, like I do that to myself because in my life I have been left and I have been right. And I know what happened when those things happen that way. And it's, there's very little, there's actually like nothing in my life I feel some like form of little zen on,
Right.
except like I need to figure out so much in my life. I'm still an idiot. But like when it comes to the way psychology and politics interact and create our stances, I think just because I've lived it myself and have stepped back from that and constantly reevaluate it, I'm like, oh my God, guys. I mean, you hear me talk about it on the podcast, the law of equal but opposite reaction, the equilibrium's in the
Yeah.
middle. There's a lot of nuance there, but like that's where it is. And it almost always, I can't think of an example. Like I can think of individual issues, right? Like if someone has a really dumb idea on one side that is so clearly like, no, that's wrong. When you then pile like 10 issues on top of each other though, I can't think of a scenario where it doesn't fall in the middle. I really
Right.
can't.
Yeah, and so when that you're self-aware to that, that's I really dig that about certain people that they're self-aware enough to see that. I find that a lot in myself because I was just thinking something similar recently on how my views change with my age and my socioeconomic status.
Mm.
So, um, like without divulging too much financial information, like the more we make per year, my views change.
Oh yeah.
And
That's
and
statistically backed, by the way.
the older I get, my
Yeah.
views
Yeah.
change. And I've just Shane Gillis has a joke that's early onset Republican. Like if you're in your mid to late 30s and you're watching, you're very interested in World War II and you're finding yourself watching history, you got that early onset Republican. I
Oh, that's
identify with
funny.
that. It was the last man when COVID locked us down. That's when I really started digging deep into podcasts and information because I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything. And so I had this need for knowledge. And I used to do the same thing. I would read left, right, and center when it came to news and politics and stuff like that. And that ground dot news or ground
Ground
news or
news.
whatever, they do a pretty good job
Yeah.
of keeping all that stuff. And I found myself just digging deeper into different subjects, especially UFOs, man. Like during COVID, UFOs was my thing. I got deep into them UFOs. With like, and you have James Fox on your show, and
Hmm.
Alessi's your program director now. So it's like you know what I'm talking about. Like there's
Yeah.
a lot of crazy shit going on, and that you're like I think there's several people that I watch that are like they bounce back and forth on what they think it is, like government or UFO or
Mm,
aliens or whatever. I don't even care. It's just interesting.
it is.
It's entertainment. It's interesting. And I think eventually we might find out the answers, or we might find out that the government's lying to us and making all these crazy stories up. But at the end of the day, that's entertainment for me. And until
Yeah.
it's not, you know,
Yeah.
and if it becomes dangerous or something like that, you know, that's different. But as far as entertainment value and stuff like it is very important. Like, 'cause you see Ryan Graves, you know, he's for safe aerospace,
Hmm.
and you see people like James Fox who have been following this subject literally, you know, 20, 30 years.
Right.
And George Knapp, he's had a career 30, 40 years. And you see all those guys, and then they they say that this is the most exciting time in ufology. And when you hear stuff like that, it's like, wow, this is kind of crazy.
And it's also like it's been these types of stories though, like it's crazy to think that because it's like, oh, this is the fad now when this is something people have wrestled with for like all of human history.
Right.
You know, and it's so tough because it's a meaning of life thing, and yeah, it's an economic model. Once again, you have people in there who, you know, your guess is as good as mine, are grifting off this to make money, and you know, could be making stuff up. But you know, I just try to hear things out and make the best judgment I can. But I don't know, man. I mean, do I definitely think there's life out there? Yes, I think statistically to say there isn't, I just don't. I guess it's not 1000%, but it's the closest thing to 1000% it gets. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
does that mean that said life is actually in a cylindrical object visiting here and was seen by, you know, Linda in Miami? Not necessarily, but maybe.
yeah,
Maybe, you know, it gets weird when the government gets involved because it's almost like it's designed to create a divide in the issue because immediately there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, wait a minute. And they're right to think that. And then there's going to be people like, oh, yeah, see, they're telling us finally. And they're right
yeah.
to think that. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Well, some of these stories though of the same objects, like that Tic Tac object,
yeah,
there's stories predating World War II with those things, and that
yeah,
you hear that, and then you're like, really? Like, I mean, it's documented, and so
hmm,
those things have been flying around like flying propane tanks for, you know, 80, 100 years. Like we don't, if that's possible, like I want to know about it. You know, if it's
I do
terrestrial,
too.
if it like, have you ever, I'm sure you've flown on an airplane.
Yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't you rather go from like where you live to like, I'm near Kansas City, like 10 minutes? That'd be cool. You
That
know,
would be amazing. Yeah,
think of like the time we could save doing that kind of stuff. And that's where I'm at. Like, if there's cool ass technology out there, let us know so we can use it. Or, you know, like let us know what's really going. Like if the government really doesn't know what it is, like release the information. We can figure it out.
yeah. You know, I'm not read in on that stuff. I wonder
Right.
about the people who are though, if it's just like, oh, they're keeping it a secret because they feel like we're too stupid and they got to keep a secret, or if they can really simulate what telling those secrets to the public would do.
Right.
That's where it gets very interesting to me. Like, and I think they do have that power. And then it
Yeah.
makes me, because I want to know, right? But makes me like,
Do I want to
oh,
know? That's like if they could
well,
just
that's the
answer that
thing.
question, like so we think that you won't be able like this is a total mind melter, you won't be able to handle it. Like if they for sure come out and tell us that, like okay, but why? Like is it going to make us question everything? Is
Yeah, well,
and
that would be the point. Yeah.
yeah. And so I mean, I look at that stuff like entertainment really, but it is crazy like hearing how far back these things go. And you had Michio Kaku on your show. That was a mind melter because
Right.
man, some of the stuff that he's talking about, like the
Hmm.
information, but then the way he articulates it, it's like, oh, I wasn't even thinking about putting, this ship up here and then being able to talk to it
Right.
instantaneously where we're at, or some of the theoretical science behind string theory and stuff. We just don't think about that stuff. Like it's all information that we know and can digest. We just don't think that way.
Absolutely.
There's not too much more we can say about UFOs, really, because without going deep diving into one of those subjects or one of the one of the stories that people have out there. One of my favorite ones actually is time traveling humans from the future. That's one of my favorite stories. Like it could be time traveling
Yeah.
humans from the future.
That's the one
But
I think about a lot.
wouldn't that be insane though? Like you think about all the things that are theoretically possible, string theory and the quantum mechanics of things, and the fact that they don't they're on record, the government is on record saying that they don't see these things coming from deep space. They see them coming from near Earth atmosphere and they don't see them traveling outside. Like I'm sure if there's evidence that they're to the contrary, they're not going to share it with us. But um, so far, they're saying they don't know where these things are coming from or going to. It'd be kind of wild to think about future humans.
I think I'm with you that the one that certainly makes me think the most is like when it's like future humans or something like that, because that gets into the Pandora's box with that begins at like, oh shit, we got time travel. And I mean, just goes so far beyond that because of what they may know and how they may view us as even so primitive, or the things that they could have access to makes it such that they don't really ever need to be here. Or you like,
Right.
it's almost like if you and I got the ability to time travel, we'd be fucking doing it all the time. We'd be like, oh my God.
Right.
But they could
Rick
be
and
so
Morty kind of stuff.
right. They could be so far beyond that that time traveling to them is like, when a caveman used a wheel. Like, why do I got to do this? They have something way better that we can't concept. So that gets weird when you start thinking about that.
And interdimensional beings, like thinking about the interdimensional in combination with future humanity. That's pretty wild too to think about. But yeah, that's
Yeah, interdimensional is like that's that big brain stuff that
yeah,
Michu got me thinking about. And
yeah,
even when I had Brian Keating in here, who is a healthy skeptic of a lot of the alien stuff, that interdimensionality though to him, that's something that he spent a lot of his career trying to prove as well.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. I like his take on a lot of things. But I think with Brian, the thing about not he doesn't like looking at back at the historical texts of that I've seen anyway, the historical texts of some of these stories of the big flying propane tanks like 100 years ago, you know. Um,
yeah, I
those are
wonder
just
sometimes if Brian's like a little bit like too sciency.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah, I guess that's where I was going with that. Yeah. Um, but so, like a lot of the times when I'm thinking about this stuff, it's just more or less to just not think about today's problems, not think about
Mm.
like groceries and shit, you know,
Yeah.
so the last podcast that we had, we just did a podcast. I was frustrated because we spent $20 on a pack of paper plates, man. And it's frustrating because
Very.
I'm broke and like so podcasting is my escape now, and I use this as my hobby, and it's very fun. I love it. Um but I like to think about things when I'm not doing anything. So I'll sit and ponder UFOs, and I'll ponder um certain scenarios of like, what if we do find out it's aliens, or what if
Mm.
we do find out it's humanity, or like, what are we going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to think? And so it just kind of takes me out of those everyday moments of the monotony of life, and it just gives something to think about. Uh, Another one of my hobbies is I love to travel.
Mm.
And so you grew up in Philly, right?
I grew up in South Jersey, right outside Philly. I grew
Okay.
up in a town
Okay.
called West Effort and then moved to Mullica Hill as a
Okay.
kid.
So there's so much history in that area,
Mm-hmm.
Philly, Jersey, New York.
Oh yeah.
And I've never actually been to New York for any period of time. We drove through on our way to Maine one time,
Mm.
and we stopped at the falls, Niagara Falls.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And one of these days I'm going to make it up there and just do like a museum tour of
Mm.
all the big places. And Ellis Island is one of those places I want to go to, because of all the immigration that came through, and all the history that's there. And there's a lot of really really cool museums up that way. What's it like, girl? Like, do you like to travel? Have you traveled anywhere?
I love
Uh,
yeah, I love traveling. I have not traveled the United States very well. I've been all up and down the East Coast. The only city I've never really spent time in is Boston with that. But I recently went to Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, and that was my first time west of Pennsylvania, right?
yeah,
Like I when I was 4, I went to Alaska. I don't remember it. That doesn't count. But I have traveled throughout a lot of Europe and a little bit in North Africa and seen some stuff. Like I'd say I've had a pretty good travel history. I want to do a lot more of it. I like going into different places and being immersed in the culture. I did live in Rome, Italy when I was in college as well, and that was like maybe my favorite time ever, and I was very immersed in that culture. That was really cool. But yeah, I'd like to see more of the United States. Certainly. I'm sure that's going to start happening at some point here. I've just been very heads down building this for the last almost 4.5 years. And so, you know, I mean, last month I traveled, I was in South America with Paul Rosalie for 11 days. I then had a wedding, which was only in Philly I was going for 2 or 3 days for that. And then I had something with my family out of town for 5 days down in South Jersey. And then I had 4 days in Vegas, like a few days after that. And somewhere in there, I was sick for like 5 days. So I was basically over the last month, like working from the road. And when I was in the Amazon, not working at all, I was totally, totally unplugged for those 11 days. So it's been a little bit chaotic. And it's also made me realize like I'm not at the point where I can do that stuff yet. I mean, we're such a bootstrap team. It's Alessi and me, right?
yeah,
Like we are the smallest, poorest team in the top 1,000 podcasts, and it ain't close.
yeah.
So, I'll get to traveling, but like right now, my priority is continuing to build this thing. And, that means continuing to live vicariously through the many people who come through here who are from all different places and travel to all different places and see different shit. But yes, I'd like to do that myself again on a regular basis as soon as I can.
So I know that you've got, well, let's just start off like we were talking about. What is it like in the area that you grew up in? Like, do you see that as, so the way I look at the place where I grew up right here, um, I don't I don't think it's anything special. I don't think it's like people come here for stupid reasons to me. Like the Pony Express was born here in the city that I live in. It's the sixth largest city in Missouri,
What
uh,
city?
St. Joseph, Missouri.
Okay. It's a
And
new one for
so
me.
we're an hour north of Kansas City. Chiefs have their training camp here. Little bit.
Ah, very
It
cool.
seems like a little bitty city, but it's 40 square miles, 75,000 people, sixth largest city in Missouri. And I think of my home as boring. There's not much here. I like to travel outside of here, but when I come back here, it's like, home. Is it like that for you?
I don't think of where I'm at as boring. I will say that. So much of history, you pointed out a few minutes ago, so much of history within this country happened in the places I've lived all my life. Like
Yeah.
I lived all over the state of New Jersey. I grew up obviously close to Philly. When I was in college, I fell in love with New York. So after college, I moved to North Jersey and was, all around New York all the time. Like I'll go for walks in New York, 8 miles, 10 miles at a time, and just like realize what happened on this street, good and bad,
Yeah.
and things like
Yeah.
that. That's why I have the skyline over here on the wall too, because it also faces the side, like on the other side of that wall. That's
Yeah.
actual skyline is like we're 5 blocks off the Hudson, so it's like right
And
there. But
note to my editor, throw up a picture of Julian's studio so people can see that wall that he's talking about.
mm,
Because I love your studio, dude.
oh, thank you.
It's quite a bit improvement over mom and dad's house,
Yeah, definitely is.
but I really liked, man, I really liked the show when it was in mom and dad's basement, and I like that you left it sort of a throwback, with the curtains and stuff. I really
Yeah,
enjoy that. I like
yeah.
that.
I love that you like that. Thank you. I for the studio being where it was and what it was and setting it up and having to makeshift a room that wasn't really built to be a studio as far as like the dimension and everything in
Oh
my
shit, you
parents'
see this
house.
thing right behind me? Man,
Yeah,
that's just a fake wall in my garage. We're in my garage right now.
love that. And like I thought it was so cool and like it was definitely ready to get to the next more professional studio and build that, but I wanted to keep some of the ideas of that first while building a whole new studio. And it was a little bit of a tiring process and stressful process. It took a couple months, but seeing it come together, like I'm sure it'll change as we move along, but like I'm happy with what it is.
Yeah.
And it's got its own good vibe, which was really what I wanted.
Yeah, and it's a hell of a lot bigger than the last space, and you can see it comes out
It
in the show.
is. It
Yeah.
is. Yeah, it's what the big thing is it's wider.
Yeah.
That's the big difference. So there's
I
more
really like the
room.
table too. The table that
Oh,
you're
thank
able to
you.
fit in there, like
Thank
because
you.
it was round at your mom and dad's house. That was so the table, man, it makes a hell of a difference because you're able to set up conversations a lot better, and you're able to have the cameras in certain spots without having to move them and everything. That's pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, yeah. And big shout out to Danny Jones for coming up here and building this table with me. That was a lot of fun doing that. I take a lot of pride in the fact that like we built this thing. And it's really
Uh,
heavy too.
he's one of my favorite podcasters too.
Yeah, he's Danny's the man. This show's awesome. But
I
yeah, he's been
actually
really good to me.
I found you through Danny's podcast Concrete
Let's
because
go.
I was looking for Andrew Bustamante interviews because he had just done one with Lex Friedman, and I had watched that one, and then I caught you. I think it was I think it was both. Jim Diorio was there, I believe, the one I watched. It was a
Right.
long
So
time ago.
probably the first one, November 2022.
Yeah, yeah.
Concrete 162. Yeah.
And so I caught that one, and then I was like, Trend to Fire, Julian Dorey. And then I was watching your stuff, and no offense to Danny Jones, because I love Danny Jones' podcast, but you're more my style and more my speed. And
Yeah, we both get that from different people because we have kind of like we go about it. I always joke I'm cocaine, he's weed, right?
yeah,
So if you're
yeah,
looking at chill, you want Danny. If you're looking to be higher octane, you want me. So
Yeah,
I hear it all. I hear it all the time. People like, no, I prefer Danny, or no, I prefer yours. But we're
which is
we
ironic because I'm a
yeah.
stoner. So
Well, that's why. That's more people like that. They want the opposite of what they are. Whereas the people who
right.
are fast, just like, I want to chill watching content. But yeah, he does a great job, and he's been really Danny's not only been a great friend, but been really, really good to me with the show and helping me build it. You know, believed in me when he met me, and you need that.
Yeah.
Especially from someone like him who's literally been in the content game since he was 17 years old. And
Oh yeah.
he's like 36, 37 now.
Your
So,
guys' production is amazing.
oh,
It's
thank you.
and Danny Jones, like of course he's got his studio thing. Like his studio is pretty awesome. But the both of you put a lot of work into the production,
Oh
and
yeah,
it really really shows. And as somebody that watches podcasts like all day long, I really appreciate that, and the amount of work that you guys put into your stuff, and you can really tell like you take a lot of pride in it, and
yeah,
it's your project, your baby, and not only is it your job, like you said, it's your career, but it's your life as well. And
it
and
is.
it's you guys are kicking ass. I love it. And
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that.
it's
That's
been so
awesome to hear.
wonderful to talk and to get to know you as a person, because like I don't get that on your show. It's all about, guests and stuff. And it's man, it's great to have these kind of conversations with people that, man, if we were in studio right now, it'd be a lot different. Like I'm crazy ass nervous. I'm anxious all the time. And if we were in studio, it'd be a lot easier to kind of have that camaraderie and everything. But I appreciate the conversations that you're willing to have, and that you really allow dialogue to open up on your show and get curious people
Thank
in
you.
there. What you said you hadn't traveled too much in the United States. Like, is there anything stopping you from taking your show on the road?
Yes, I that's a very bad precedent to set. I would
Really?
oh my God. Setting up first of all, there's something about you're on my turf.
Yeah.
This is my domain. That is a part of letting me do my job. If
Yeah.
I have such OCD, and I'm thinking about so many, I could never do that. And I refuse to do it. When I had fucking 10 listeners on this show, a friend of mine, I'm not going to say who it was, but a friend of mine was directly connected to someone with like international, right? Very, very famous. And he was like, "Yo, I'm gonna give him a call." He does like he's like this with him. So he's like if I tell him like do this, he'll do it. He's like, if you fly out to see him, he'll do 3 hours with you in person. I said no.
Yeah.
I said and a lot of people would call that crazy, and that's probably right, but that's how I roll.
No, man, I don't think it's crazy at all.
There were 3 to 5 things that you got to pick out in a business that are like you're absolutely will not, like this is how it is. You will never change on those things. It's like the Steve Jobs rule. That's pretty much, I mean, that's who invented it. He's like, you got to pick your hard lines in the sand on things that you have the utmost conviction about. And I was like, in person, on my turf. Those were 2 of my 5 things. And it was like, I know myself. I could never do that. I mean, the number of things, even in my own studio, I'm thinking about every time while this thing's going on, sitting here doing the audio,
Yeah.
it would drive me nuts. And, never say never on things, because the one thing that could change way down the line, this would be far down the line, is if outside of this podcast, I started doing other types of content because I were a, you know, very wealthy content creator where money and resources were not a thing. Yeah, I'd pay everyone to take care of it all for me. And I know it's going to be perfect because I'm hiring the best
Yeah.
people in the world to do it. and we'll do another type of content with that. But for this actual show, I'm sure at some point we'll do some type of special content with something like you saw Lex with Paul. He was down there right before I was in the Amazon. He
Right.
did a podcast in the jungle. I think that's great. Like I'm boys with Paul. Like in the future, would I do a podcast in the jungle with him? Probably. Right.
What
But
about what about something like in an RV? Like your own type of setup in an RV? Like you say, well, like let's just use me for instance. I live an hour north of Kansas City, and you're like, hey man, I'm gonna be near Kansas City. You want to hop up in the van and we'll do a podcast? And hell yeah, that'd be awesome.
yeah,
Like
but I,
how
I want to I want to have a family. I want to have a wife and kids and stuff. Like
yeah, that's
that's
not
that's that's
not
gonna be just
conducive.
that's what I'm saying. It's one thing if someone's coming to be a guest on a podcast, right? I'm taking one day out of their year.
Yeah.
They can do that. I'll go do that for people. You kidding me? But like if you create a traveling show, I'm gonna be on the road all the time. Like I
Yeah, and you
don't
already don't have enough time the way it is.
yeah, listen, things change, people change. I can't even begin to tell you how much I don't have an interest in that. When I trap, like that was the other thing. People were like, "Oh, are you gonna go get content down in the Amazon?" I'm like, "No, the fuck, I'm not."
Yeah,
I'm
I
like, I'm going
remember.
down there for me. I want to go travel and enjoy. My phone never came out of my bag. It was glorious. The whole point was to unplug. So, like, when I travel, it's not to say like I won't do content traveling in the future. I very well might, but like right now, that's not really a thing. And down the line, I also, I like being present in the world. I I know people make everything about content, like other
No,
creators and
no.
stuff, but I don't want to do that.
I love that, man. I remember when you were talking about that on the Q&A, like how many comments there were of people, "Hey, you gonna do this? You gonna do that?" And you're like, "No, I'm going to get away."
Yeah,
And man, I did dig that because I was like, "Yeah, I bet that guy works constantly."
that's all I do.
Yeah,
Those were the first days I legitimately took off
yeah.
since I started, and
And
it
a lot
was
of
like,
people,
yeah,
go ahead.
good,
A lot of people are chasing that content, whereas
yeah,
like that's not what I want to do at all. I am I am worried about my content, of course, but at the same time, this is all about me. This is
right.
what I'm doing for my hobby, and I got the inspiration from you. As a matter of fact, like I was wanting to do it anyway, and watching your show, and then you interacted with me on some of the well, when you have the premieres and you're in there sometimes, you interacted with me and I was asking you questions about editing software and stuff like that. And it's speaking of which, the editing software that we chose, Premiere Pro,
Mm-hmm.
wow. Like
It's good stuff.
it's the most expensive part of my setup, really.
Yeah,
um,
that means you're doing a good job. 'Cause that's great.
yeah, I love I just when I put this stuff together, man, I don't know to quote a movie or a TV show, Netflix. I don't know shit about fuck.
Yeah.
So I this is all like I'm a 39-year-old moron. Like I dropped out of high school. I really don't have a formal education past the 8th grade. I'm a functional idiot. So um so when I got into this stuff, like I kept finding issues like, oh, they want me to pay for this information. And that's where I was getting a lot of the knowledge of how to do stuff was just asking people like you. And a lot of people they don't want to share that information because they look at you like competition.
Ah,
And I,
dude. Yeah, that's brutal.
yeah, so that I've ran into that a few times. Like people have contacted me wanting to like discuss things, but then when they find out I actually know what I'm doing, they don't respond.
Yeah.
And it's not that I know what I'm doing; it's I know what I'm after. I know what I
Right.
want,
Right.
and that's something similar to like you wanting to unplug to travel. And you were talking about how you want a family, you want to start a family. How's that
Not
going for
not
you?
not right now, but
Right.
I'm saying eventually. Yeah, like not at all right now. But yeah, eventually, like at some point, right woman will walk into my life. Probably not going to happen at at the moment, just because it's not really fair to them. I'm so busy doing what I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
If you have to make time for other people, that's a problem. You got to have
Yeah.
time, right? And so, again, never say never. Maybe the right girl's like, all right, that's cool, but I have yet to run into her. I can
Yeah.
tell you, that's not, especially when you're talking with girls who are like 25, 26,
Yeah.
they like me, and then they want something, and I'm like, I can't do
Yeah.
that right now,
Yeah. I can't
and that's
provide.
it. Yeah, it's frustrating, but it's
Yeah.
also it was my decision. It's my
Yeah.
decision to do what I do. It's my decision to be in this era I'm in. Is it dragging on longer than I think it should? Yeah, I do. But there's nothing, I can sit there and complain about that, or I can just keep taking action. And, that's an easy decision. I just got to keep taking action so that I can make more money. That's really like people say, what do you need? What's your problem right now? Money. Nothing else.
Yeah.
I don't need
Yeah.
anything. I know exactly what we have to do. I know exactly how it's going to go down. I need money. So I have to make more of it because that is how I invest in this thing. I
I was
invest
just talking
everything
about
I
that.
put into this. And it's like, I don't, I invest everything I put into this, and I don't have enough to take it to the level that people who have a similar subscriber number to me can, because they had
Yeah.
money before they did this. They worked hard and did something well, which, shout out to them.
Yeah.
I started this in my parents' house with no fame, no money, no nothing. So, I think that's a great story. But yeah, it gets a little frustrating when that is just constantly the bottleneck. So we'll get there, but it's coming along.
If I had to be now, I've got 21 years of parenting experience. Um, I started my parenting journey 21 years ago. My oldest is 21 and my youngest is 5. It
Wow.
just turned 5. So out of experience from children and dealing with children, I would have rather waited to have kids, because my kids now are getting the best part of me. And
There you go.
I didn't think about it like that until my wife had said something. So I used to be huge. I used to be 520 pounds. Yeah, yeah. I got pictures. Like one of these days, maybe like when we get off here or whatever, I could send you a picture. Or are you
Wow.
on
You look
Facebook?
you look great. I
Thank
mean,
you.
I think I have one, but like, man, I'm
I
never
was
on
gonna
that.
say I got plenty of those pictures. Well, I'm sure like if this relationship goes anywhere, you'll see them. Um,
Yeah.
I used to be 520 pounds, and man, I felt like I was just sitting around waiting to die. I've been a stay-at-home dad for the last 10 years. And in hell, I think it was 2021, I had my weight loss surgery. I've lost 300 pounds.
Wow. Congrats,
Yeah,
man.
yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
thank you. It wasn't easy. A lot of people think that, and even I thought this, like the weight loss surgery was like easy way out. And no, it is not. By
Yeah,
far,
there's a lot with it.
it was really hard. And not only it's hard to keep that weight off because now I'm able to eat whatever, do whatever I want to do, but it's hard to keep that weight off. So I constantly have to stay active. But at almost 40, raising my little one, he's 5, he's autistic, and his name is Rocket. And
Rocket, what a name.
hey, I was oddly enough, is the 50th year anniversary of the moon landings when
Mm.
the year he was born. And I was just trying to think of some cool name to give him, and Rocket was what it was. Uh, but it's kind of like like I compare my relationship with my youngest son, like how my grandparents were with me. I have a lot more
Mm.
patience with him than I do with, or than I did with my older children.
Sure.
I'm a lot more wise in the things that I say, the things that I do that I know can affect them. And I'm more focused on having fun than making money at this point in my life. And I think the what you said about traveling and having, if you have to make time, that's not a
Problem.
ideal situation.
Yeah.
The fact that you're self-aware enough to understand that is amazing. And man, you're only 31. You're pretty young. And so like thinking of Julian Dorey as a father, I think you'd be a great dad. And
Dang. Wow.
so
That's a big compliment. Thank you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. I think, man, I think with the self-aware the self-awareness that you have and the curiosity that you have in combination with the fact that right now your biggest issue isn't anything else but having money because you know where you want to go. You
Mm,
know how to get there as well. It's just, man, you got to have money for a new camera. You got to have money
that's
for new
right.
mics.
That's exactly
And
it.
that's kind of where I'm at with my show right now is I know where I'm going. I know how to get there. It's just like the camera that we're on right now is a webcam. It's $200 Best Buy, but like it makes it look great, but it's all connected with a 10-foot cord that I can't remove that 10-foot cord. And so my setup is right here in front of my guests. And it makes it a pain in the ass because they can see the camera, they can see the television where the camera angle's at, and then sometimes it messes with them as a guest and having to
Oh,
work
really?
through that. Yeah, yeah. They can
I
see
used to have that in my old studio. They could all
really.
see it. Yeah, the TV that was on the desk to my right was a flat
I
screen, and
prefer it that way.
it had their face on it, and that's where I kept their camera.
Yeah, I prefer it that way. That way I can monitor things as they're rolling.
Yep.
But I think I'm going to turn it around so they can't see it, and I'm going to have somebody back on in the backside operating, which is not a big deal for us because it's husband and wife team. Like it's so we're not.
Put
I'm not
that put
alone.
put that 5-year-old rocket to work.
Hell yeah, hell yeah. He's been on this shit. Like our first episode, I think he came through and
Oh, that's cool.
like if you go backwards in our content, this is only like episode like 38, 39. Like my first episode was terrible, but
That always
like
is.
yeah, it like and I heard you talking about like first episodes one time, and I've heard a lot of other content creators talking about first episodes, and like Joe Rogan's even talked about it. And then I went back and listened to his first shows. His first shows really were terrible. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it happens to all of us. And I just, I do you deal with the issue like you find it difficult to believe people want to talk to you?
Oh, all the time.
I I
Yeah, it blows my mind. Like I constantly have like a Leslie in my ear, like, dude, you can ask this guy to come on. I'm like, yeah, he's not to me, like yeah, I gotta get better with that. I don't know. I've never really thought anything of myself. That's another thing I'm working on. But yeah, I'm just a dude. So I'm like, why the fuck would they want to do this? And then they do it. I'm like, oh wow, you came. Cool. Thank
yeah.
you. You know?
And that's kind of how I thought when you responded the way you did when I asked you to be on the show. Is like, oh damn, I should have been like asking all these other people, like this was easy. It hasn't always been that easy. But in my experience, I think I think the bigger you are, people think that you are more likely to say no. So
Yeah.
and so they don't ask. And so
Yep.
that leaves people open even when like so it leaves people thinking they're not open and they're actually open because people
That's
think
true.
that.
That's true.
And so I think all the time like the worst thing that they can say is no. The worst thing that can happen is I sound like a moron. And I think like if I'm honest with people and explain to them like listen, I'm an anxious guy. I'm nervous. I'm going to work through it. Just hang with me. And I think the more I explain that to people, it gives them an insight of my humility and how I'm like this all the time. I don't hide
Mm.
myself. I've done some crazy shit back in the day, that I'm not really proud of, but that doesn't mean that is who I am. And I struggle
Of course
sometimes
not.
with believing that I'm good enough or that I have a hard time believing that I'm intelligent because
Mm,
like I'm not educated, but I'm curious. I'm very curious and I
that's what
never
you need.
stop learning.
That's
And
that's what you need right there.
the way the way I think about this show is I just want to learn shit. I want to talk to people. I want to learn shit. I want to learn about you. I want to learn about like I'd love to have like Andrew Bustamante on to talk about parenting.
Mm,
Like he's had his podcast going for a little bit, and he talks about parenting on his podcast with his wife. Amazing parents, amazing parents, and they Andrew Bustamante talks about his childhood and her
mhm.
childhood and how they come together and their experiences as children uh, help focus their careers, and their career helps focus their kids and parenting and what they think, how they feel. And the way they put
I
that
was
out there like that is awesome. I
Yeah,
really enjoy.
I was just pulling that up too because I want to see Andy moves around a lot because he has a obviously very mobile job. Like he does a lot of different things. But I liked how when they like I'm hoping they're gonna start with the uploads again because I liked how they also brought home things that like, oh, this CIA spy couple has some of the same problems we do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can
Yeah.
relate to it. There's something to that for sure.
And the way they are with their so the way their marriage is, it reminds me of my wife and I.
Mm,
Because they're very so um I, they're not like the typical American family. Like they probably argue and fight a lot less than the typical American family because they know so much about psychology and stuff.
mm-hmm.
And so that probably helps them quite a bit in a relationship, managing the relationship. But with the way I'm the talkative one.
Mm,
And when we do the podcast together, you can see that my wife doesn't talk very much and she's very reserved in her thinking. She's very reserved in what she says. She would much rather me do all the talking and instead of her piping up and saying whatever, she'll hold it in. And then Andrew Bustamante's wife's kind of like that. And he's like,
same
I
thing.
have to bring that out of her.
Yes.
And I'm
Yes.
like, man, I love that. I love that he calls that out as it's happening. He's like, I have to pull it out of you. And they're very honest. I feel like their show is very honest and very real. And regardless of the CIA, they're great parents. And so I
Yeah.
love hearing their take on things and how they deal with some of their issues within their house. And because it's not that dissimilar. They have the same issues that we have with our kids. It's just how they handle it is a lot different.
Yes. Yes. There's something to be said for that too, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I some other things that I noticed on your show with some of your guests is they're just good people. You
Mm.
have a lot of good people on your show. Jim DiOrio is one of my favorite guys that you've
Yeah,
had on your
he's
show.
awesome. Yeah, he's such a
Very
good guy.
authentic
Yes.
guy. And what you see is what you get. And
Yep.
some of his opinions that he lets out about the FBI, we don't really think about as people on the other side. He's like, hey man, we're people too. We're prone to mess ups too. Like can't be too hard on us.
Yeah.
And the FBI is really one of those departments that they don't get a whole lot of love because of the things that they have to do, you know. And I think he's
Especially
a real
recently. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think he's a real authentic guy, and I
Yeah.
loved that show. Um, there's just a whole lot of stuff that I love about podcasts that your show encompasses all of that. And like I said, David Satter was one of my favorite guests that you had on. I think that one, Andy Greenberg is another one. You
Yeah.
know, Andy Greenberg, that episode was, I think you've had him on twice now, right?
Yeah, 99 and 127. Yeah.
Yeah, that was badass episodes. I really, really liked those.
Yeah, he's something else, man. He's done some amazing, amazing reporting for years and years and years. It's great to have him on.
and so that there's conflicting opinions on your show about Snowden, the CIA take and Andy Greenberg's take.
Hmm.
And I really like that you see both sides of that. You see, how
There
you
are two
know,
sides to that. Yes.
yes, absolutely. It's not. And so is the other guy. Oh hell, I can't think of his name now. The journalist that's uh in trouble for sharing secrets on WikiLeaks, Julian Assange.
Yes. Yeah.
That's not cut and
That
dry
one.
either.
No, he's a little bit easier to see. Snowden had a loss and a loss. Like he was, no matter what choice he made, he was going down a slippery slope. If he made the choice to shut up and say, well, I can't break my code and say this, 10 years into them doing all this shit, 11 years into them doing all this shit, then the slippery slope of the Constitution being in tatters, as far as our rights go, was down.
Yeah.
Like that's what it was. But if he does say something, he does the right thing constitutionally, but he starts the precedent of, oh, people can come leak something. So the next guy will leak something with his precedent, and it's very serious, but not quite as serious. And he's like, yeah, but Snowden. So you let him off, and then the next guy's here, and the next guy's, and eventually you're down here with someone leaking some bullshit and
Yeah.
saying, yeah, but the guy above me. And so he was in a lose, lose, lose. But I don't agree. I do not agree with I actually think Andy's argument on that is one of his not good arguments. Like it doesn't, he's like, yeah, he should have done it, but do it the right way. He tried that.
Yeah.
He did try that. He was on record trying that, and it didn't work.
Yeah. And I
Like no one was going to do anything about it. So like that's what he did. He came forward and you know did it his way, and there's a lot of argument there, but it's a
well, it's kind
tough
of like that.
question.
It's kind of like that UFO whistleblower, David Grush. He did everything the right way, and they're still like,
At least his is legal though.
yeah, yeah, but
Like
nothing's been,
he's in the United States floating around no
yeah,
problem. Of course he
yeah,
has detractors, but like he did it. He was able to do his legally. Snowden didn't have a way to do his legally.
yeah, yeah. And then that's what I struggle with is watching. There's that Snowden movie, and I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there pro Snowden that's going to make him look great. Like if
Yeah,
he was that
sure.
great, maybe he wouldn't be in Russia. But at the same time, his government sees him as an enemy. And
Well,
that's kind of rough.
parts of his government do at least. I think
Yeah,
there's more people in government who are like, with him than we realize. I'm not saying there's people waving Snowden flags all over the government. It's not what I'm
right.
saying, but I think there's some people who are in there because they're people too, and they're like, man, some of this stuff is a little fucked up.
Yeah,
I get why he did that, you know? And then of course, yeah, there's people who are like off with his head. And I don't think that's the answer for sure.
I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
Maybe if you give him a jail sentence of some kind to appease the ones that want his head, and you let him out for the people that don't. You know,
it's
um,
never enough though. It's not,
yeah.
that's the problem. That's the
I
problem
would
with
I
these
would like to see
situations.
him not in Russia myself, like because like I'm sure he does okay there, but I would like to see I don't like to see anybody have to run from home. That sucks to
I
have to see
agree.
that. And then you think about like as a journalist, is that going to happen to us? You have to think like, am I going to uncover something that's going to get me killed? You know, like I don't think I ever will, but at the same time, you never know, you know?
Yeah, I try not to think about stuff like that. Like, I mean, I feel like that would never happen, but you know, if you found some crazy shit, I don't think you know what you'd do till you're in the situation.
That's true.
And
That's
I
true.
don't know what I would have done if I were Snowden. That was a very, very hard situation to be in.
Yeah.
And I think what we do know is that pretty much everyone else has made the decision to stay quiet
Yeah.
in those situations in the past. So were they wrong? Were they right? Tough to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And given the information that he gave us, and then the retaliation that happened afterwards, and him going through several different countries to get where he's at now,
Right.
like somebody had to chase him to get there. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he would have stayed in one spot had he not been chased, in my opinion. Um,
Yeah, they kind of set that up. They wanted to make sure he was in Russia because
yeah.
it was a bad look to have him in
Yeah.
Russia. Like that was very much a setup.
Yeah. I just don't you don't so you want to be pro government until something like that happens, you know? Like at least
That's
I
right.
do anyway. I'm a very patriotic guy. I'm not, and it's kind of like I love Russia. I love Russians. Not a big fan of the Russian government. Um, I don't know much about China, so I can't say that I love China. Um, all the Chinese people I know love them. Um,
Mm.
not a big fan of the CCP. Um, and I love America. I love Americans, but our government's tough to love sometimes, you know?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are at a point where even on a bipartisan level, people could agree on that. They'd have wildly different reasons why, but it's because that the buck stops somewhere, right? And the
Yeah.
buck stops with the government in a country like ours. And so people on mass scales, everyone has their wants and needs. No one's ever going to get all their wants and needs addressed, and so they look for something to blame. And sometimes they're very right to blame that. Of course,
Yeah.
I mean, I do it too, and I think there's a lot of fair arguments for that.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of fair arguments to you know, the January 6th insurrection is what they call that. I think it was more like a riot, but not an insurrection.
Yeah,
Um,
I think riot's probably a better way of putting it. Yeah.
I think looking back on stuff like that, and the controversy surrounding that whole thing, and then it seems to happen on the Democratic side with the Trump protests, or not Trump protests, but the Trump when he was indicted and all that stuff, and there was all these political, just last week or the week before, there was all these political news press or news conferences outside of the court. And I'm like, how is this even legal that people are doing this? Because it was very obviously political. And I think
Yeah.
I
That's
don't think that's a horrible precedent to set there.
that's what we're seeing though all the time now. And when you start getting like courts, for example, politicized, you got a problem.
Yeah.
And that's where I get nervous about, the teetering we have. There's always been problems. There's always been things that like we didn't have the internet in the past for everyone to complain about it and point it out, but like big problems, right? You look at the Vietnam War era. I mean, Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
imagine if we had social media during that. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
So I try to keep that as a perspective, but yeah, I mean, there are some concerning things that, people, all these Republicans and Democrats need to put aside party affiliation, and I don't think they will, to address and agree like, okay, we shouldn't do this or that, you know?
Right. I've seen over the last few years, like, now tell me what you think of this. I think of I've saw the United States as a whole get really, really bad. Are we in the process of a shift, a political and societal shift where the boat is trying to right itself?
That's what I hope.
I see that happening.
That's what I hope is happening. And I feel like if we can just get past the like Biden, Trump, Clinton era,
Yeah.
which has been these last 8 years and will be the next four, I wonder if things will calm down. Hopefully not enough as we haven't done so much that you can't put the genie back in the bottle, but I think it's literally the main characters have, for wildly different reasons, been very, very incendiary type figures. They emote a emotional reaction in people for, again, very different reasons. But that has been the presidential candidates over the
Yeah.
past 8+ years. So maybe if that wasn't around, but then people are going to be like, oh, well, something will just replace them. And unfortunately, that might be right. But, if something, and I hope it doesn't, but if something really bad happened, I feel like people would forget a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
And
I
I,
think
I
so
hope that
too.
doesn't happen, but I
I
worry
also
about
think
that.
if something really good happened, it could have the same effect. Um, nuclear, what is it? Fusion or fission? Fusion, I think. Um, well, either way, where they're getting
I
more
hope you're right
energy
about
out
that,
than.
but I hope you're right about that, but I disagree with that. People are inherently negative.
I
So,
agree. I agree.
if it were something positive like, oh, like a savior appeared on the earth or something, it was like some religious connotation, fucking everyone could see it, maybe. But, you know, if some scientists like created some cool science, they'd take sides on that too.
Yeah,
It
that's
it, it
true.
unfortunately people respond to okay, think about when you're having a mentally unclear day, right? Like last night I did not really sleep much, so I've been very, very tired all day today. I've been like very out of it. If like, and this is a horrible way to think, but if someone close to you like died, someone close to me had died at 4 o'clock today. My whole vibe, I mean, it would have been horrible, but my whole vibe would have been changed. I would have been thinking about, oh, I only slept 2 hours last night and I can't
Yeah.
really move around well. That goes out the window because your body releases things,
Yeah.
right? Our body responds to fear triggers in that way or emotional triggers in that way. So that's why we got into World War II because Pearl Harbor. The
Yeah.
war on terror happened because 9/11. I mean, 8 months before 9/11, it was at the time and actually still technically might be like the most, disagreed upon election by the two parties ever.
Yeah.
People forget that because on September 12th, no one remembered Al Gore.
Yeah, you're
He
absolutely right.
wasn't
And
a
I've
thing.
heard you talk about it a couple times on your show that like the days and weeks after that day,
Hmm.
man, I miss the people of this country during those times.
Yeah,
We were all united and we we had a common enemy, man. And I think
that's it.
sometimes it does boil down to that we weren't fighting each other. We had something else to go after. And I think throughout human history, whenever you have periods of long periods of peace, you do have those moments where things blow up and we start fighting with each other, and then when we have a common enemy, things do change to where we come together
Yeah.
as a people and fight towards that common enemy. And I've heard several different people disagree with that, but I mean, maybe that was the hope behind telling everybody what's really going on with China. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah, that's what I get at.
because that kind of stuff's so the stuff with China's been going on for decades, like literally
Yeah.
decades. Um, and Trump was very adamant about, and here's something that a lot of people don't think about with Biden and Trump. They're like, um, foreign policy wise, Trump and Biden are kind of the same person. Like they have very, very similar foreign policies.
How do you figure?
So, with Trump, like he was sending weapons into Ukraine during his presidency. He did a lot of stuff for Israel with Israel during his presidency. He also started a trade war with China, And Joe Biden essentially kept all that stuff up.
He did. China, they ended up having a very similar policy. I would say a huge part of foreign policy, though, is the role you play in the world. And I do think they're total opposites on that. I think, Biden's a little bit too old school, like let other countries tell us to do whatever we want to do. Whereas
Yeah.
I didn't like Trump's isolationism from, and like he was mad at some legit things where we were given a lot more than we were getting. And I get that. But like you can't, if you ever saw that image of him with his arms crossed next to Shinzo Abe and all the other leaders in the world are like, dude, what the fuck? That's not a good, even if you don't like those people
No,
and you think
I,
they're
I
corrupt,
agree
that
with
yeah,
that, but
that's not a great look. Whereas then Biden just regular old kumbaya on every issue, that's
right.
also not a great look. So I think the answer is in between those two. And on Israel, Trump was the greatest president ever to happen to Israel.
Yeah.
Biden, they are hanging on by a thread with him. And obviously, like he still is providing a lot of aid over there and everything, but there's, that's a the people who are hardcore pro-Israel now are on the right side.
Yeah.
That's not a left-wing issue.
Right.
So I do think there are some differences. I see China, you're absolutely right on though. There are some very strong similarities there.
I did see with Trump though, he did say and do a lot of shit. He did not, he did not, so he did and said things that he did not follow into fruition, like the threats with NATO and stuff like that. Those were
Mm,
just threats. He didn't he was just talking. And
yeah.
that's what I saw a lot of Trump, not too much. He said a lot of shit, but there wasn't a lot of action with that. So
Yeah, yeah, and that's the other thing. It's like right now we've had a guy who's holding on by a thread to sanity, and so he doesn't know what he's saying half the time. That's not a good look. And
right.
then last time we had a boisterous guy who just kind of says whatever's on his mind, which yeah,
It's
sometimes
kind of
that's
the same
refreshing.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
agree.
but
Yeah.
and from a foreign policy perspective, no, the fuck it is not.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you're dealing across cultures and stuff. So
Yeah.
that's why look. The election is November 5th. I'm going to wake up November 6th and go about my life. And I'm going to enjoy my life and do what I do. And we'll talk about this stuff or whatever. But, like, I'm going to be disappointed in the result no matter how it goes. And, there's people on both sides who will come at me and be like, how could you be disappointed when the other person is? Rah, rah." It's like, I'm just over that, man. I'm
I
so, so over that.
I'm with you. I'm with you. And you know what? I think that's a good place to leave this conversation for right now.
Yeah, it's been
Um,
all over the place, man. Thanks so much for having
yeah,
me on.
and man, I have ADHD like a motherfucker. So it's pretty evident in my podcast. But man, I appreciate you hanging out with me, man. I'll send you a text here in a little bit, and we're gonna link in your Instagram, Twitter, well, X, and your podcast down in the description. But Julian, man, it's been a great time. Thank you for coming on and being a guest on my show. Thank you for the great conversations, and most of all, man, thank you for your show. Thank you
Thank you.
for putting together your podcast. It's not Trendifier, but man, it trended the right direction. You took off, and I'm very, very proud of you, man.
Thank you so much, Ricky. And once again, thank you so much for supporting me for so long with this. I really, really appreciate that. You've been in there for a long time, and it's guys like you that make this thing possible. So my
Uh,
pleasure coming on, man. We'll do it some other time as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, man. We'll see you.
All right. See you later.